Hi guys, it's Sam from Sammy's Reviews, and in today's video we're gonna be discussing I'm Thinking of Ending Things, both the book and the movie, in details. And if you haven't seen the movie before, please check out my spoilery-free review because this review is gonna be full of spoilers. And if you want to know my opinion about the book, I also reviewed it on my channel, which I'm gonna link both videos down below. Anyway, here's your warning and let's get started. So the best way to start with analyzing this movie, let's start with the title, I'm Thinking of Ending Things. So it can have both meanings of you're thinking of ending things with someone that you're in a relationship with, so breaking up with someone, or you can think of ending things with yourself, which means committing suicide. And from here comes the meaning of the movie. So before getting into that, I think I'm Thinking of Ending Things, although it is not an original screenplay by Charlie Kaufman and it's actually adapted from a novel, it fits perfectly in the filmography of Charlie Kaufman. If you compared it with his other movies, it fits perfectly, discussing the same themes and the same approach that he uses in all of his movies. And it's super exciting to get another Kaufman movie since we haven't had an actual Kaufman movie since 2015, Anomilisa. And before we get into the details, I just want to mention how awesome it is for Netflix to produce such a not so Netflix movie, because Netflix tend to produce movies that are teen rom-coms such as The Kissing Booth and To All the Boys Have Loved Before and stuff like that. But lately with producing The Five Bloods, The Irishman, and now I'm Thinking of Ending Things and A Marriage Story, these are all great movies that Netflix has produced. However, the trailer is misleading. It makes you sign up for a movie that's light and fluffy about a couple who goes on a road trip, but things get a little bit scary or a little bit trippy, and that's not the case. Actually, by the third act of the movie, you lose your marbles. Actually, in reality, the movie is really hard to watch and it's really hard to grasp, and it takes place in 3 locations which are really claustrophobic, and by the end of the movie you kind of get really suffocated and really irritated. So now let's analyze the movie. We're just gonna start with a simple question. What is actually happening in the movie? And for that, we're gonna take the hint that Ian Reid, the author of the novel, left us at the very end of the last page of his book, which is you can start by the end of the novel and reel it backwards to get what really happened to Jake. And this is what we're gonna do. So basically, Jake is an old janitor in a school and he's thinking of committing suicide. And in order to do that, he made a scene in his mind made of a collision of both a past memory and a fictional layer in order to make a decision whether he wants to commit suicide or not and to face his fears, because this is his coping mechanism. And in this dream, that his consciousness tries to leave hints and bits and pieces for you to know what's real and what's fiction. For example, his girlfriend, which is a fictional character, has no name. Sometimes they call her Lucy, Louisa, Luisha, Louise, and sometimes she's a painter, a waitress, an actress, a poet. You kind of don't know exactly who she is. And she constantly receives phone calls and text messages from an old man telling her there's only one question to be answered. And presumably, in my opinion, this question is, should I commit suicide or should I not commit suicide? Should I end things or not? We also see his parents in different ages and developing different diseases. And since Charlie Kaufman loves the idea of taking very mundane things and things that we are all gonna go through it eventually and give it a very, very horror-like approach and making it really scary. For example, taking care of your elderly mother or helping your dad to the bathroom, or seeing your mother or your dad develop a disease and you're seeing them slowly getting older and weaker, or even not knowing what to say to your partner in a very long drive, or hearing your parents tell your partner about stories of your childhood that you do not wish to share. All these small things are so mundane and it happens to all of us, but he likes to make them so scary and horror-like, and an excellent example of that is actually Synecdoche in New York. I remember some scenes of this movie and it really gets under my skin, although it is very normal. Anyway, we gather from the way we see his parents aging and we see them in different ages that Jake has been living with his parents till the very last day where they died, and we see him slowly trying to remember the past and trying to remember them getting older and weaker, because that's what he's going through right now. He's getting older and he's getting weaker. So he created a scenery in his mind of how things could have been. We also have the great dancing number that is masterfully directed by Charlie Kaufman of two lovers, and we can deduct that the male is Jake, and it abruptly shifts to the real Jake stabbing and killing the imaginary, the dancing number Jake, and his body lies on the floor while Jake the janitor sweeps away the snow around him in a beautifully poetic scene, because the real Jake is what actually stopping the imaginary Jake, or the ideal world sort of scenario Jake, of living. So let's talk about some of the cool direction in the movie. The first half of the movie, where it takes place in the moving car, the direction and the sound mixing is awesome. It's amazing because it keeps shifting from inside the car where their voices are really loud, and from the clicking of the windshield being muffled in the background, and then it suddenly shifts to the outside of the car where their voices are not clearly heard, and the clicking of the windshield is really loud, and the whistling of the wind is really loud as well. It's a great way to build tension in this scene, because you kind of get irritated from the constant clicking of the windshield, and how you can sometimes clearly hear them and sometimes not so clearly hear them, and sometimes you can see her going through a monologue in her head, and sometimes you can see her arguing with him. So there's a lot of shifting in this scene, and combined with the very long scene filled with heavy art references from William Wordsworth to David Foster Wallace to a 15-minute conversation about women under the influence, the audience are left really annoyed. Also, the poem that she mentioned and claimed at the very beginning of the movie that it's her own, but we later found out it's someone else's poem, Bone Dog, and how freaking hard it is to say this mouthful of a poem, and she kept saying it with a straight face and looking directly at the camera, and it sends shivers down your spine of how creepy and how confronting it is to hear someone say stuff like that. So the tone kept getting more bleak and more dull. Also, a very cool scene or argument that happened between Jake's girlfriend and Jake's father in their house, when she showed him photographs and paintings with no human element in it, and she was telling him how it feels so melancholic and so sad, but he wonders how can a plain landscape gives you emotion of sadness or joy without the human element. And here she smartly answered him, telling him that maybe you are the human element, because when you look at the landscape, you are the human element, and depending on how you feel is how you're gonna reflect your emotions on this landscape, which explains the very last shot of a landscape and a car that is completely drowned in the snow with no human element, yet the audience can feel sadness and empathy toward the character that is dying from hypothermia inside the car, but you can't see him. So this is the answer to the argument which Charlie Kaufman aroused. Also, before briefly comparing it to the book, I want to talk about the very last scene, the speech scene that is made of a mishmash between John Nash's speech in A Beautiful Mind and Oklahoma the musical. Of course, it's very understandable that he used Oklahoma the musical, and it's very smart because he's a janitor and he keeps seeing kids in the theater class playing out Oklahoma and other very famous musicals. And in this surreal scene, we see Jake in a very exaggerated old makeup accepting a Nobel Prize, and this is referenced again because he is a physicist who ended up being a janitor, and he broke out into a very heartfelt song talking about how he wishes the girl he loved is in his arms, and how he wishes his life ended up differently, and how he had so much potential to be someone else. It's very heartfelt, and it abruptly and suddenly fades out to blue instead of black, so that's a very artistic choice. So now let's compare it briefly to the book. The movie is mostly loyal to the book with some differences. For example, in the movie we shift between the couple and the old janitor, but in the book we shift between the couple and a conversation between strangers talking about a man who commits suicide. And also in the book we know for sure that the girl that Jake fantasizes about is actually a girl he met, but instead of reaching out and asking her for her number, he shied away and he stared at her creepily, and this is why they never got together or they never met each other again. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the moment the book ends, the author asks you to read the book in a different way and to start reading it from the very end and build your way up to the beginning. And this is how you're gonna understand Jake's reason of committing suicide, because in the book they found his diary beside his corpse, which is the section we keep stumbling on while reading the book, but we didn't understand it is Jake's diary. Also, during the conversation between the strangers, they say that the diary was so muffled and so coded that they did not understand why did this man committed suicide, and we assume that the diary is actually the entire book or the entirety of the movie. That's it for me. Please leave your opinion down below if you have any other interpretations of the book. I would love to know more. It is actually so crammed with details and so layered. I feel like I want to reread the book and I want to rewatch the movie, and it arouses great conversations. What do you think of my analysis? Thank you so much for watching and see you. Bye!